Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran trying to explain to your nephew what a keytar was, or else a scrappy upstart trying to explain to your uncle what an OP1 is, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the fourth Friday of July 2020, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Elijah who drove a Nissan Altima with a window decal of Calvin and Hobbes peeing on a Volkswagen logo, and who always tried to sell you hallucinogenic pills that he had wrapped up in a Sour Patch Kids bag. And old Elijah would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We can have nice things now. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians from around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. You get hosting and a custom domain name, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. You can crowdfund your next project. You can do fan subscriptions on there commission-free. It's a great service. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go there and try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code TWS to also get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Thank you, Bandzoogle. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming months, you can do so every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube, where I do a weekly live stream. We're calling it Sunday Songs. I go over there, I play some songs, I play some covers, I take questions from the chat Q&A, I take requests from viewers in the chat. It's really fun. Stop by YouTube on Sunday night and come join us. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. Firstly, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support a creative endeavor that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay, but that you do because you got the cash lying around and you dig the show. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make a huge difference. So thank you for all the people that have already done that. And if you can't contribute in that way, I totally get that. I've been there before. There's a couple ways that you can help that are totally free, that cost you nothing. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. Or secondly, you could just tell a friend about the show. Spread the word. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end the harassment there. This is a great conversation with Will, and I hope you enjoy it. Our guest this month is a native of Tennessee, whose career has had many different chapters. Will Hoge attended college in Western Kentucky before getting bit by the bug and dropping out of school for greener musical pastures. He made his living in Nashville in the late 90s, playing live and building a regional following, at which point he attracted the attention of Atlantic Records. He's toured with ZZ Top, Jason Isbell, Squeeze, Need to Breathe, Lisa Loeb, and many others. He's performed at the Grand Ole Opry and the CBS Early Show. His song, Even If It Breaks Your Heart, was taken to the top of the country charts by the Eli Young Band, and it earned him a Grammy nomination for Best Country Song. He's recorded for Atlantic Records, Ryko Disc, and Cumberland Recordings. He lives and works out of Nashville, where he releases albums as an artist himself and also works as an in-demand songwriter for other artists. American Songwriter has called him a resilient rocker and an effusive artist. NPR has said that he plays sharp, passionate rock and roll that seems to exist out of time. And Rolling Stone says of his latest album that he's found peace, but still sounds pissed off. That sounds about right. Will was picking up some groceries from the Kroger in Nashville when I got him on the horn, but luckily he made his kids unload the car for him so he could sit down with me and tell me about his journey so far. Will Hoge, thanks so much for being a part of The Working Songwriter. From what I can tell, early on in your life, you went to college. It looked like you had some other plans in mind. It looked like you might actually be a civilian and not a musician. When did that change? What happened?
Pretty quickly into my college tenure. I'd loved rock and roll and all of that for years and got in bands right before I finished high school. And then by about midway through my first year of college, I joined my first kind of real band. And it was just, I was way more interested in that than I was school. And so that second year was really just, I basically just paid tuition to be in a band.
Well, you know what? You probably got more out of it than you would have by going to class, because I went to college for a while and I didn't get a damn thing out of it.
But you have a podcast. That counts, right?
Yeah, that's true. I guess that counts. So you started with a band. You were in Kentucky at this time?
I just went up to Bowling Green, to Western Kentucky University. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so were you playing around there? Were you kind of touring locally in the area, tri-state area, or what were you doing?
That was a lot of, one of the things that was really cool about that band, they were older guys. They were, I was 18 maybe, and they were probably all in their late 20s, maybe even, early 30s at that point. And so, they were real dedicated to rehearsing and practicing and working on songs. So we toured some, we played locally. We would come down to kind of Nashville and Bowling Green, Murfreesboro, a little bit here and there, but really get my feet wet. But the cool thing was I just learned so much, because like I say, they were real pro about it. It wasn't a bunch of dudes that were just trying to, drink beer and get laid on a Friday. They were trying to drink beer and get laid on a Friday and be in a good band. So it was really educational.
Man, that sounds like it. When did that go for you from something that you were doing on the side while college was going on to, wow, it looks like this could be something that I'll do to make money going forward?
I worked, so I left school really that second year, and then I moved back home and I was playing in that band and sort of commuting, and then that fell apart, started other bands, and kind of did the hybrid of square job and musician for probably 2.5 years, maybe 3 years, waiting tables and bartending and playing in a band. And then I was working. I had taken a job down at there used to be a Planet Hollywood on Broadway in Nashville, and where the old across from the old Groom Guitar Building. And I had a job down there, so I was playing in a different band at that point, it's called Spoonful, and we were touring and playing a little more regularly and really starting to get out in the Southeast. And you'd go out Thursday, Friday, and Saturday and just love it, and I'd feel really connected with kind of what I wanted to do and who I felt like I was or was becoming. And you come back home on a Sunday and go to work at Planet Hollywood wearing that stupid Jams shirt that had the galaxy on it. And one Monday I woke up and I just looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I called and quit. And the boss was like, so what, you're not coming in today? I was like, oh, I'm not coming back in ever. And I just, I didn't. I never went back. And that's the last day job that I ever had. That was probably 95, 96.
Yeah. I can remember quitting my last square job, and I think it was a similar thing. It wasn't quite that acrimonious, but it was just like, look, man, I don't even think I'm coming back to pick up the $200 check you have for me. I just don't. I don't. It's not worth it. I just never want to see this building ever again.
And then were you worried? Was there a plan? I mean, that's people ask that, and I don't know that there was ever I didn't have like a concrete roadmap. It was just one of those things, like I just knew I wasn't going to do that anymore. And I was going to have to just sink or swim.
Well, think about what a different time it was. Like, so I was in Chicago at the time, obviously no kids. I wasn't married. And my wife and I weren't even together at that time. I was paying rent in a house. I was paying $300 a month. That was my nut every month that I had to make. You know what I mean? So it's like,
right.
I knew I could find a way to make $300 in a month playing music. It wasn't going to be a problem. Was it similar for you? Like just such a low overhead?
It was. Yeah. And, and there was a point where I lived, I had a real, just like you said, like a $200 a month apartment that was gross. I mean, it wasn't nice. But it gave me a place to live where I could do that. And then there was a point where my grandmother passed away. And I lived in her old house for about a year and kind of fixed up. She'd been in it since the 50s and it needed some paint and little bits of work here and there as my family was going to sell it. And so I was able to live there for about 10 months or so. And that's really where I wrote what was ultimately my first record and kind of recorded the demos there. So there was about a 10-month period of being able to really focus because, again, at least I didn't have rent, had a car payment and that was it.
Yeah. That is so critical. And I feel so bad for younger artists getting started out now because I'll talk to them. They're like, yeah, I just moved to East Nashville. My rent is only $17.50 a month. I'm like, well,
I know. It blows my mind. And, and that's what I think about it all the time. I don't know how you start a band at this point. I don't know where you go to do that, because like you said, you can't do that. You can't live and do that in Chicago anymore. You can't, no. I don't know how you would do it. I don't know if you got to move to Mobile, Alabama or something like that. I just don't know.
You do got to go somewhere besides these epicenters. Recently, I tried to put together a, like this monthly residency thing in New York City. And I thought to myself, well, it's New York City. Like all my friends that play music live in New York City. And I quickly realized that no one who's a real musician actually lives in New York City anymore. Everyone's gone, man.
Yeah.
Because you cannot, on a middle-class musician salary, you can't live in New York without a trust fund, man. It's just impossible.
I don't know how they're doing it. And, and Nashville's changed. I mean, just so much over the years. I mean, we moved over. Of course, I grew up here, so I've seen lots of change. But even we've been in East Nashville about 15 years. And, there's a point where I don't know that I could live. I mean, I couldn't live where we live now.
Right.
If we hadn't bought this house 7 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to live here. I don't know where we'd be at this point.
You'd be somewhere in the nether reaches of the BNA airport, I'm sure.
Exactly where we'd be. Yeah.
Well, so listen, there's a kind of a period. You said you quit that job in 95. You first signed with Atlantic in 02. Can you speak a little bit more to how you made it work? That's like 7 years there between when you quit that job and when you first attained some mainstream success there. What do those years look like?
It was a lot of touring. It really was a lot of touring and a lot of writing. I was real slow I always just wanted to be in a band and sing and write songs. I mean, it was a simple thing for me. And I always wanted looking back, I think I was always into the end result and didn't focus on maybe the craft as much as I could have. And I realized that a lot of that period, the periods that were good and what led to the growth were the moments that I really was focused on. I put myself on a schedule. I didn't study writers or writing, and I should have. And I was lucky enough, I think, to just sort of stumble into this idea that like I was going to, I'd make myself wake up every morning at 9, which sounds like a luxury at this point, with kids. But at the time when you're going to bed at 4 a.m, waking up at 9, you feel like you're really accomplishing something.
No, really.
But that was it. It was just, I spent so much time. It really, I mean, a solid, it was broken up a little bit, but there's probably at least a 2.5 year period in there where it was, it was really writing every day and making myself write a song or 2 songs. And some of them are garbage, but at that point when you're really young and hungry doing it, you're just puking out ideas a lot of times. And, I was going to say smart enough, but it wasn't smart. It was just dumb luck on my part that I put myself on this thing. And it was just, I would write all day. And then usually at night would either go play or I would go see someone play. And it was just, it was a real big discovery period for me. I was really on my own for the first time. So there was just a lot of learning. I feel like it was a huge learning period in there between, starting to really dig into that and then signing a record deal. There was a lot of graduate level life work that went on.
Yeah, man. I think I had a period like that in my life for several years where I was able to just write every day, almost like it was just like a day job. And what I'm finding now that I don't have that time in my life, I'm like, wow, I learned all these skills writing wise, efficiency wise, that, I can write like a lot more efficiently now because of that time I put in. I know. Yeah. I know when something's going to be a dead end a lot quicker than I used to back in the day because I followed every one of those freaking dead ends to its dead end, and I don't have to do that anymore. Do you find that still continues to pay dividends for you?
Yeah, it does. And that's one of the things that, because you look back on certain periods and you go, man, I could have done so much of this different or better. But I do feel like I learned a lot. And, one of the things for me was also learning, I don't mean this to sound egotistic. Like singing for me was always pretty easy. I had a voice pretty quick early on that people seemed attracted to. Just, when we would even play in cover bands, it was always something that was easy for me. And I felt like there was a period real early on where I could sort of sing myself out of average songs.
Yeah.
And I mean, on one hand, it's a bonus, but it wasn't until I really started to dig into that a little deeper and realize like, oh, if I can really focus and make these songs great to read on a page, like if you think about it a little more like a writer, it took me a long time to really circle back to that and not just sort of take a 85% idea and just sing my way out of it. And, I think that's something I still continue to try to get better at.
That's really interesting. That's something that is like an innate gift and an innate talent that helps you so much. You feel like in some ways hamstrung you a little bit. That's really a weird dichotomy.
Yeah, and it can just be a crutch. I mean, I don't want it to be a crutch. I mean, I feel really fortunate that, there's folks that seem to like the way I sing. I feel confident in that. But, you also don't want to be the dude that just, people say, well, you could sing the phone book. It's like, yeah, but nobody wants to hear anybody sing the phone book. Like, I don't want to sing shit that, you look at it again on a page and go, well, I don't like this story. I'm not interested in this. And so, where I feel like I've had the most satisfaction and ultimately, I guess, even success is when I've been able to find a middle ground on those two things and really hit the sweet spot with both.
That makes sense. So tell me about what it was like to have spent all that time working on your craft, all that time working touring, and then somewhere in the new century here, very early on around 01, 02, you signed with Atlantic Records. That had to be such a huge professional vindication, such an exciting thing to happen. How did it come together?
We were really playing and touring really hard at that point. I had signed a publishing deal basically to get some money to go and make what became my first record called Carousel. And at that point, I mean, we were touring all over the Southeast and Midwest. I mean, just any gig that we could get. And it was starting to, it was a weird time at that point. Well, you remember, there were just little scenes popping up and radio stations, rock radio stations, AAA radio stations could still kind of find something to latch onto and play it. And there were a couple of songs on that record that started to get airplay at a station in Birmingham and stations in Nashville, and little things like that kind of made blips on these A&R people's radar. And when it just came down to, we had a couple of record deal offers, which was something that was really foreign to me. And fortunately at the time I had Dan Baird from the Georgia Satellites was my original guitar player. So he had kind of been, he had been through the rocket ride. I mean, and seen what labels do and how people work and all these different things. So I sort of had this confidant that was an incredible gift. But, it came down to, there were there was Atlantic Records, and then there was this new upstart label in Nashville called Lost Highway that at the time only had, I think they just signed Lucinda Williams and maybe signed Ryan Adams, and I think that was a Whiskey Town, and those were the only artists. And then, you know, Atlantic, and Atlantic was this label that I had spent my childhood, you know, sitting in front of a record player looking at that logo while I was listening to Aretha Franklin or Otis Redding or the Stones or, you know, Ray Charles. And so it was this interesting moment, you know, and I was totally lured by the bright lights, big city, big label thing. I mean, I sat in an office with Ahmet Ertegun, and he talked about my record and what he liked and what he thought we could do touring wise. And I don't know if that's just a sales pitch, and he says the same shit to every person that sat in his office, but I was in hook, line, and sinker. I mean, I just thought, man, if I can to get the opportunity to be a part of this lineage of artists, not that I compare myself to them, but to even just be a footnote, I just thought that was the coolest fucking thing.
Oh, man. You know, there was a time in my life, the label and the logo that did it for me when I was younger, that was Columbia. And I swear to God, if Columbia Records had come to me when I was 27 and put a contract in front of me that said, we will get your firstborn child if you sign here, I would have been like, sure, yeah, man, where do I sign? I mean, that logo, those logos, if you grew up the times that we grew up, there's a huge psychological pull to that.
It is, man. And it's, you know, and I think they know it. I mean, it's just one of those things. I think it is like the New York Yankees or the Chicago, I mean, you know, the Cubs, it's whatever. It's this thing of like, if you grew up in this certain area, like there's a pull to it, and they know it. I mean, you know, it's an easy thing to come and whine and dine you. Plus, you know, I'm just, at that point in my life, I've never been on an airplane. I flew on an airplane for the first time to go sign a record deal. You know, so all of a sudden I've gone from the furthest away, you know, I've never left home in anything nicer than a 15-passenger van. And, you know, you get flown to New York and LA and meet with these folks, and they whine. I mean, it was like it was a cliche, and I lived it. I mean, I lived the cliche, and it was awesome. You know, and then you get to go, and, you know, they took my first record, and we re-released it and worked real hard on that for a year or two. And then they, you know, put me in the studio in LA with a quote unquote real producer. I mean, he was a real producer, but for me, it was, you know, it was a big thing. And, yeah, it was just a whole different world. And it was real educational on every level.
What did that process look like when I think the reason that you said quote unquote real producers, because, you know, the people from the label come in and say, hey kid, this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
How was that process different? Was it that much different?
It was just a lot. So what I learned was that real early on with Atlantic, like I said, you know, we met with Mr. Ertegun, and that was all great. And about a year into it, he stepped down, and two guys took over as presidents of the record label. And I, at that point, even now, I'm not the most astute businessman, but even then was like, I don't know that two people as co-presidents of anything is a great idea. But, you know, it was a hell of a learning experience. And yeah, so it was just a lot of cooks in a little bitty kitchen. You know, at that point you go from, you know, things are going well and you're selling few thousand records on your own, and you're touring a bunch, and, you know, you're selling 400 or 500 tickets a lot of places, and life's pretty good. And then you realize this does not matter to Atlantic Records. Like, they don't, this isn't even pissing on their front lawn at this point. Like, they want really big, successful, massive numbers. And so then the producers that start getting talked about are just talked about for very different reasons for every single person. You know, where I'm talking about, you know, hey, this Transcendental Blues record by Steve Earle sounds really cool. What if I got Ray Kennedy that does all of that stuff to do the record? Mm-hmm. And, you know, they were like, yeah, no, that's not what we're going for. And, you know, then there were all this talk of, like, they wanted these massive pop producers. And then, so it was just a really interesting back and forth. And where we ended up was with this guy, John Shanks, who had some really commercial pop success, but was also a fantastic guitar player that had grown up in Melissa Etheridge's band and played with Rod Stewart for years. And it was a really cool mix. I mean, I learned a ton from him. I mean, he was real LA pro, super musical. So there was a lot of good that came from it. But like I say, it was a long process. You know, like I imagine you make records similarly. I mean, you kind of go in and you got a little roadmap and you bang them out. You know, you work hard, but it's not something. It's not months. I've never, except that time, spent months making a record. You know, and that was just like, wow, I just remember some of the times the sessions were all great, and you just played with a lot of great players. You know, Kenny Aronoff was on a few things, and Greg Lease played on a bunch of stuff in Jackson Brown's band. So, I mean, I was really honored with the people that were around and a part of it. But you also go like, I could make 10 damn records for the amount of money that we're making. Like, what is this? But it's you buy the ticket, you got to take the ride, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that model is just, okay, well, a lot of things cannot work out for our label, but if we get one Adele every 2 decades, we're set, you know?
That's exactly what it is, man. And then you just realize, again, like it almost becomes comical because, you know, I think at the time, because I remember going in to meet with Atlantic, and I remember sitting with Mr. Erdogan and a couple of the other staff members, and, you know, they were like, is there anything else you want? And I said, yeah, I want to know, before we part, like, I want to hear the craziest, like, who is the band that has come through here that has been the absolute, like, most debaucherous rock and roll, like, I want to hear it. Like, give me the dirt.
Yeah.
And they're like, you're not going to. I was expecting, you know, Zeppelin and Bonham and all of this stuff. And they said, you won't believe this, let me tell you. And I said, okay. They said, Hootie and the Blowfish. I said, what? And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I get to that point because, you know, they were on that label and sold 20 million records or whatever of that huge album of theirs. And then about the time we were working there, you know, they had put out their second record that was a flop because it had only sold 11 million records, you know. And I remember thinking, you guys are upset with this band that only sold 11 million records. Like I you know, there was just, it starts to get into mathematics that are fairly staggering at that point. You're like, oh, so the 20,000 records that I sell, you really don't care about. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I got a lot to learn here.
What's really inspiring about Will's career is all of the twists and turns it's taken. He started out fronting bar bands, ended up signing to Atlantic Records at the turn of the century when a major label deal could still be an absolute rocket ship to the moon. Then he took his masters and walked when he decided on a new artistic direction that the label wasn't interested in pursuing. It takes a lot of character to make decisions like that. It also takes vision. And not a vision that's bolstered by some all-knowing, fixed confidence, but rather a vision that is able to change over time as circumstances change and incentives change. A vision that is slowly but constantly changing what it's looking for. Those are the kind of eyes that will lead you in the right direction over time. Here again is Jared Carter, my latest literary obsession, with a poem that encapsulates that shifting vision succinctly. It's entitled After the Rain. After the rain, it's time to walk the field again, near where the river bends. Each year I come to look for what this place will yield, lost things still rising here. The farmer's plow turns over without fail a crop of arrowheads, but where or why they fall is hard to say. They seem like hail dropped from an empty sky. Yet for an hour or two, after the rain has washed away the dusty afterbirth of their return, a few will show up plain on the reopened earth. Still, even these are hard to see. At first they look like any other stone. The trick to finding them is not to be too sure about what's known. Conviction's liable to say straight off, this one's a leaf or that one's merely clay, and miss the point. After the rain, soft furrows show one way across the field. But what is hidden here requires a different view. The glance of one not looking straight ahead, who in the clear light of the morning sun simply keeps wandering across the rows, letting his own perspective change. After the rain, perhaps something will show, glittering and strange. You mentioned earlier the name of a guy that was close to you. I want to know some more about him. The first time I met Dan Baird, I was opening for you. And I was opening for you at the Southgate House in Kentucky. I must have been 23 years old. And I walked in for sound check, and there was this guy sitting cross-legged on the stage, and he had an ammunition container filled with strings, and he was changing his guitar strings frantically, and he was talking like a mile a minute about the details of the Mike Campbell solo on American Girl. This is what I remember, okay?
Yeah.
And so then at soundcheck, he finally puts his guitar on and plays it just flawlessly, and you guys end up closing the show with it. That was the first time I ever saw Dan Baird. I met him briefly, but not really.
Yeah.
And he was just such an iconic figure of music, an iconic musician to me. Sounds like he had a big influence on your life. What was some of the advice that he had after going through the ringer with the Georgia Satellites regarding this whole label process that changed your mind on things or didn't change your mind?
Well, he was cool. You know, he's cool in that he also understands because he's been the guy in front the guy in front of the mic.
Right.
So he really gets. There's also a point where we all have to go and just fuck it up ourselves. Yes. Nobody's going to get it right. You know, and you're going to take pieces of advice from people, good, bad, and indifferent, and fuck it up your own way. But, you know, he was really insightful. I remember, and it's almost an exact quote, but, you know, something about, look, the thing is when the rocket ride starts, you want to have the right people around because it doesn't slow down when it starts. And you don't want to be on the downward trajectory of the rocket ride with the wrong people, just because it doesn't last. Mm-hmm. And that was real true. And, you know, it was cool because once we signed with Atlantic, he realized, you know, that I remember the first gig we did, you know, he came up to my parents. They came to a first show we did in Nashville, and he was joking with them. He's like, you know, I'm closer to your age than I am to your son's age. And we had a laugh about it. And, you know, he realized at that point, you know, where this thing was going to get busier and busier and harder to do. And he wanted to still do some of his own things. And so he bowed out, helped me find a replacement guitarist. And he's just been a confidant for years. I mean, still one of my favorite people. We write together all the time. We got a song together on this new record of mine. And, you know, one of the things that I learned from him too is just, you know, from a live performance perspective, we just, I think, come from that same neighborhood, which is like every night really matters and you have to play it like the world, you know, you want to go for the thing we used to always say, like you want to be the band that's so good. Like you want to see a band that was better than your band anywhere on the planet that night. If there was somebody better than us, I would damn sure like to have seen it. And, you know, Dan he would do it every night. He would give it and give it and give it, you know, and slow songs, fast songs. I mean, just 100% committed to the moment in the songs and on stage, and just a fucking joy to be around. I mean, it's again, just incredible to have that at my disposal that early on.
And you know, what's really cool is I've met enough people in the business, and I'm sure you have too, who their natural instinct, you know, if there was someone older playing with a younger guy who's got a great record deal heading in a certain direction, there's plenty of people that would have just like kind of glommed on and tried to use you for everything that you were worth. It's really cool that he just immediately realized what was going on, helped you find a replacement, and then was able to remain your friend, able to remain an artist that you could write with. I mean, so few people would choose that route.
Well, and only because he's the real deal. And like you said, I mean, like he's always done this for the right reason. I don't mean my thing, but just music. Like he's just wanted to be a bad motherfucker. And that's what he tried to do every time, you know, and when we talked a couple weeks back, you know, he is quote unquote retired from touring now. And he just said, you know, he said, you know, I did this last European run. And he said, I just felt like I didn't have what it takes to do this consistently anymore. He said, so I'm going to take a year. I'm going to write. I mean, you know, his conviction, you know, because we also know plenty of people that, you know, you stay on this damn circus ride too long,
yeah.
You know, and it's a scary thing. I mean, you know, you may have thought about it. What does quitting even look like? I don't even know how you do it or what I would do. I mean, literally, I've tried to think of, I made a list a year or so of like, okay, I'm just going to quit. Mm-hmm. What can I do? Like realistically, and I could be, you know, my list was 2 things long. I could be a substitute school teacher or a truck driver. I mean, those are the 2 things that I really have any sort of hope of doing. So there's no real idea for quitting. And Dan is one of those guys that's never going to quit, but he's also not going to go out there and be the guy that's a parody of himself. You know, there's enough guys in their 60s that are doing that now. It's like, I don't necessarily want to be that guy. So again, Dan kind of becomes a North Star for those of us that want to have some dignity.
And so just to wrap up this chapter of your life, talk to me a little bit about how things went with Atlantic after those first couple records.
Well, so Blackbird on Lonely Wire came out. That was the one with Shanks. And, you know, we did a real big, I mean, a pretty big push. I mean, you know, we saw a lot of the muscle get swung around from Atlantic. And it was a minor success. I mean, it was totally successful for me. It was a minor success for them. I think that they wanted to talk about a third record. And I went to Mississippi and we made it was 2004, and I made an EP called the America EP. Mm-hmm. And it was my first sort of foray into doing anything that was social commentary or political songs. And, I took it back to I was really happy with it. It was a good experience in the studio, and we recorded down in Oxford, Mississippi. It was just with my band, and a cool little record. And we took it to Atlantic, and I sat with the 2-headed presidents, and they were awesome. And they said, man, this is really cool. And we think what you're doing as an art, we agree with you also politically speaking, but this isn't the kind of stuff that we want to put out as a label. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay. And so they said, so we can give you money and you can go make another record, but we need something that's got hits and has radio singles and all of the things, or we should just part ways and call it a day. And so we shook hands and parted ways, and I went and made that record.
Man, that seems like a really healthy way to have ended things, actually. That seems like everybody wins in a way.
It really was. And, you know, I still was, I think I was bitter for a couple years just because there's still some wounded artist ego bullshit that goes on when somebody says they don't love you anymore. You know, it was like, mm-hmm. Well, what do you mean? Like, you know, I still want to believe that, you know, if Neil Young brought you this record, you wouldn't say that. And then, you know, there's a part maybe that's true, but I'm also not fucking Neil Young. Like, I'm a guy that sold 25,000 records or whatever it is, and they don't care what my political stance is because they can't get this shit played on the radio. But it was cool. I think that it was a good enough relationship. I had worked really hard. They knew we had worked really hard. They had worked hard for me. It just, you know, it was a heartbreak because you want to think that shit like that's going to work out if you work real hard, and it didn't. But yeah, it was pretty healthy ending. I'm still friends with a lot of those folks, and still, you know, they still come to shows and are supportive whenever and however they can be.
Right on. You're probably sick of being asked this, but I have to ask it. It's such an important part of your story. There's kind of a before and after moment, not just in your career, but in your life. You had a very serious and tragic motorbike accident. Can you talk a little bit about maybe not necessarily the accident itself, but the before and after with both your creative life and your personal life?
Creatively, there's the old joke that you have your whole life to make your first record, and then you have 10 months to make all the other ones or whatever. Right. And, that's kind of what happened. Everything, once the record deal with Atlantic started, I just feel like, I had written a bunch of songs pre that time, and then, you're just running and gunning and writing, and I just felt like it was a cycle. I didn't know it at the time, but I was just, putting out records real consistently and touring and writing a bunch, and just, it had become a habit, really. I mean, it was, and not necessarily in a good way. But I wasn't really taking that time to be a writer and do all of that. And then and just everything was about me at that point, really and true. I mean, it was a beautifully narcissistic time in my life. And then when the accident came, right before the accident, I had met my current wife. She was my girlfriend at the time. We'd gotten pregnant, had our first kid before we were married, but then, so we got married in January. My accident was in August. So we had a 11-month-old, about 16-month-old, and had been married since January. I was in the studio making this album, The Wreckage, which would have been my 6th record at that point. And that's when the accident happened. And I had to do rehab and learn to walk and do all of these different things. Couldn't use my arms for a while. So there was a solid year there where, music just didn't register. I wasn't really even listening to music. I mean, like I say, everything was rehab and physical therapy and occupational therapy. I mean, all of the things that you had to do to just be a human again. And then when I graduated from a wheelchair to a walker, and I was able to start playing. I bought a mandolin because I could at least get my hands to move enough to make 3 chords on a mandolin.
Oh, wow.
Then when I went to a walker, I was able to start. I still couldn't tour for a long time, but at that point I had a friend that was a publisher in town, and he said, have you ever thought about co-writing? And I said, no, not really. And he said, well, look, while you're home, why don't you let me, I won't do, not like Nashville. I'll set you up with some cool people and just try to write some songs to get yourself, kind of back at it. And I sort of begrudgingly did it. And it was a huge rebirth, I think, in a lot of ways, because that was the first time since my first record where, I was really focusing on songs.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't this thought of, I've got to go out and play Friday. Let me hurry up and get this done because I got to go do something else. It was the moment where you finish a song and then a day or two later, you go back and revisit for a minute and go, no, that is really good. No, fix this, change that. What if the bridge was different? And also, realizing at that point with a young marriage and a young son at home, the idea of being gone 250 plus days a year wasn't as enjoyable as it used to be. And so the still time at home, it just changed a lot about my priorities for it not just being about me all the time.
Talk a little bit more about that rebirth. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just want to kind of zero in on that. Talk about that rebirth with songwriting. Do you think it was specifically because you had more time or because you were co-writing? Those sound like 2 significant but different shifts.
So I think it was both. I think that the time thing was a huge part of it. It was a huge part of it. But then the co-writing thing was also interesting because I think when I had tried that years ago, when I first signed a record deal, it got back to a little bit more of what you talked about with the guys that are the opposite of Dan. You would get in these co-writes with a guy that all he heard was, here's a dude that writes rock songs and he has a deal on Atlantic Records. And they didn't give a shit whether we were writing it. They cut, and they would, it wasn't productive. And then so with this, these were guys that, were just starting or they were cool writers, but kind of on the fringe of the Nashville. It wasn't trying to write Nashville songs. But they were also real pro about it. So there was this combination of what, having a new concept of how the time works and really focusing on that. But then also looking at the way these Nashville writers worked, where, again, you set an appointment and you go to work. Like, you don't just, I'm writing when I'm inspired. It is like, I'm going to write because it's my job. And, sometimes they would think about things in a different way. So it exposed me to just different people's process. I've never really done that before. And, I think I was able to pay attention to it a little bit more. So even people that I maybe didn't write a song that I loved, I would go like, wow, they just approach a hook of a song different than I do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it was not good, but it was still like, I just never thought about the craft that way. Or they would talk about, how they would look at a scene in a song. It was a really interesting thing. And I mean, I ended up writing a lot of great songs in that period as co-writes. And I think then that ultimately led me to being a better solo writer as well.
Were you writing a lot of these songs for your own work going forward, or were you writing them for specific other artists, or just in general for someone's publishing deal to put it up for many different artists? How are you using the work that you finished?
At that point, it was all just for me. The stuff for other people didn't come. So in that whole period, I was making the album. When the accident happened, we were about 4 songs into the album that would become The Wreckage, and wrote a bunch of songs in that period. And we ended up scrapping all but 2 of the songs that we had tracked originally. And then the other 8 or 9 that are on the record were things that were written in that period. And that included Even If It Breaks Your Heart. I mean, a lot of songs that had become, sort of, I guess, staples in my catalog. And so it wasn't until the success of that song, which was a couple years after I had recorded it and put it out, when it became a country hit. It wasn't until after that I signed a publishing deal and became a quote unquote songwriter. All of a sudden then people were like, oh, well, he's a songwriter. We should let him write songs for Keith Urban or whoever it is. But the truth is, I've never had anything cut and recorded that wasn't on my own records. All the stuff I've written with other people or for other people, it's never bared any fruit. But these things that I feel like I've poured my heart and soul into, those are the ones that people have recorded and had success with. So I try to keep that knowledge in my head as much as I can.
Man, just talking to you here, it sounds like a real winding road to where you got to, but thinking about it, it's landed you in a place where everyone wants to be, which is making authentic records for their fan base, and then having other, pop acts coming in and just swooping up that stuff as well. I mean, it just seemed, are you feeling that? Like you're in just a wonderful spot right now, creatively?
Man, yes. And it took me a long time to feel that way, and then a longer time to be able to admit it. Because I feel like there's a point where, one, you just don't want to sound like an asshole. And again, it's not a bragging. There's people on my block that are far more successful than me as writers and as commercial artists. I mean, so it's not a comparison thing, but that's where I had to get. And like you just said, I mean, what is it we all wanted? I mean, maybe there are other guys that wanted like rock stardom and jets and all of that stuff. But sure. Like you just said, I mean, what I wanted, I always said in early interviews, it was like, I just want a career, longevity, be able to play the music I want to play, make records and write songs. And yeah, it is. And this pandemic has put some perspective on it. Cause there's a point where you look around and you're like, man, I've got all of these things that I really love from doing this thing that I love for 20 years. I mean, yeah, I feel pretty fucking lucky.
Yeah. And not having to go back. Well, and most of all, being able to avoid putting on the Planet Hollywood Galaxy T-shirt you were talking about.
Yeah, no more. My goodness.
Man, that's a hell of a journey. Talk to me a little bit about now the period that. Talk to me a little bit about now that folks in Nashville do look at you as a quote unquote songwriter. Well, no, that came out wrong. Let me start this again. Talk to me now about this period after you get that first song cut by a major artist and other people are coming to you. How do you work with artists now that they're coming to you? Does that change the dynamic at all?
No, and there honestly becomes, that's a little bit of a drug because, you spend, at that point, I'm 15 years into my career doing this, and, all of a sudden you have this thing that happens, and I don't know anything about that world, but, then all of a sudden there's this number one song, and they start, the joke about mailbox money is real. They're just like, all of a sudden, you just start getting checks that you're like, what the hell? Like, huh? I didn't do it. Like, I wrote this song, and now this, like, it's the greatest win-win of all time. But you then, and then this company comes to you and goes, hey, we'll give you a yearly salary to write songs, and you can kind of still just do your thing. We're going to try to put you with cool people, blah, blah, blah. And you go, shit, I'm going to get paid. Even if I don't leave my house, if I don't tour one show all year, like, I'm going to make enough money to live on. Like, it's crazy. And then you catch yourself, or I did, maybe smarter people don't, but, you start doing some, mathematics in your head, and you're like, if I only did one more of these, like, I could be done forever. Like, all of a sudden the songs become economical, right, and not artistic sometimes. And I don't know that was not a healthy. There's people in this town that are great at that. I want to first and foremost say that I am not one of those people. And so it was a really confusing 4 years for me of sort of doing that writing, and I was still doing, obviously I was still doing the artist thing, but, I also got invited into a weird world because having a hit at country radio, all of a sudden, a lot of these country artists are cutting songs, and that's great. But then you've also got a format that's going, hey, we could play some of your records. Like, what you do is, where the format is, we could do this. And, so then again, you sort of get pulled into that Atlantic major label, big time world and realize again, man, I'm too little a fish to be swimming in that big old pond.
Right.
And so you knock around a little bit again, and then, I was put on a lot of shows and playing, you'd go do these writers rounds, and you'd be playing with these folks that most of them didn't even write their own songs. And they, would have like you do a guitar pull, and the artist couldn't even play guitar. The artist would have a guitar player and then sit there and sing. And, I catch myself looking around like, this is not where I want to be or what I want to do. And so, then you sort of close up shop there and go plant your flag back in your own yard.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, man. Well, talk to me a little bit about your own records. Now, you got a record coming out this year. Talk to me a little bit about the conception of the recording of Tiny Little Movies. What does this new record mean to you?
It was a culmination of a few years of hard work. When I made my Anchors record 3 years ago, I think, at that point, I didn't have a band, and I had sort of cast, as I was producing the record myself, and I had cast. I didn't want to just hire studio dudes. I wanted to, like, find guys in Nashville that were great players in bands or whatever, and kind of put together a band that felt like a band in the studio. And so I had a bunch of guys that I really loved in town on that record, and one of them was Tom Donovan, was a guitar player that I've known for a long time. And he, so after the Anchors record was recorded, he said, I joined the band if you want to tour. And so he did, and we put together a rhythm section for that record. And it ended up being Chris and Alan that play with us now. And we went out and we toured a bunch, and it just kind of clicked. And we came back home and we made the My American Dream record that came out in 2019, I can't remember. And again, we worked and toured all over the world, and the band was really cool. And we recorded that My American Dream record all together. And it was just it was real quick. and on the floor, I just sat with a guitar and I would play it in the studio, and then we would track right then. And I've been writing a bunch of these songs for Tiny Little Movies, and we went in and got a Todd Snyder's place here in East Nashville. We went in and rehearsed for 3 or 4 days and did sort of pre-production, and got the songs really hammered out production-wise. And then we went into the studio and recorded, and it was just a really great, we captured a really cool moment with the development. You know, as bands there's a sweet spot for all bands, you know, and you never know how long that's going to be. And I think we're in it, and we were really just kind of starting to cook, and everybody listening to one another the right ways and pushing one another the right ways. And I thought we really brought the life out of the songs, put the life into the songs, if that's a better way of putting it. But it's a record I'm real proud of, and I think where the My American Dream record was incredibly myopic as far as its social and political focus. It's almost a concept record, really. With this one, I really wanted to get back to something that felt more cinematic and more just individual stories in each song, not a concept for the whole record. The concept being, I hope it's just a great rock and roll record. Right. And I think we captured it.
Well, anytime you're making a rock and roll record and the place where you rehearse it is Todd Snyder's studio, that's a good place to start. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, there are definitely worse ways.
That guy's the most rock and roll human being I've ever met in my entire life.
I just love him, man. Every time, you know, we don't see one another. We did, you know, because he was, I met him years ago when Dan was playing in my band, because he would sometimes be one of Todd's nervous wrecks when he had that crew of guys together.
Right.
And yeah, Todd's just always he's just a sweetheart. He's never been anything but super kind to me, and he's a good one.
Will, before I let you go, talk a little bit about what it's been like to raise kids as a musician and how you find that balance between being a father and also being someone, you know, writing songs, not to mention touring, but writing songs and the artistic life. It requires a lot of you. And obviously parenting requires a lot of you. Talk a little bit about how that balance has worked or not worked, and how you've corrected it over time as a parent.
Well, a couple of bonuses. You have to have a kick-ass partner, and my wife is incredible about it. And we're real lucky too. This is another thing where living in Nashville is a bonus, because it's not a weird thing to have your father be away on tour. You know, I mean, in each of my kids' classrooms, there's 5 other kids minimum whose parents are either artists or tour at some level, a front of house guy or a lighting guy. Right. I mean, so there's where if you lived in Denver, maybe you're the kid in class and nobody understands what's happening. You know, there's almost a built-in support group for my wife as well as the kids, which is real bonus. You know, one of the biggest things I've learned is just, you know, but mine are now to the age, there's a point when you start where they don't even know you're gone. They just think it's cool when you're around. You know, they're young enough, it doesn't matter. And then there's a point where they can't express that they don't like you being gone. And it's, you know, there's a lot of acting out, and you have to figure out what that is. And then, you know, mine are now at the age where they can just flat out tell you that they're disappointed that you're not there. And there's a part that's really heartbreaking about that. But one of the things I learned real early on is I just have to be real honest with them, you know, and when I fuck up, admitting it, you know, hey, I should have not done this. I should have come home, and that was a mistake. And then not repeating that mistake, I think is hugely beneficial. And I think, again, just being honest, and you know, the kids see me work. I mean, that's the other thing. It's you know, they come out on the road occasionally and they see what really goes into it. So they know that it's not something that I'm doing that's just like sitting around eating bonbons. I mean, they know that there's merch to sell and a van to drive and paperwork to do and songs to write. And, and as they become music fans on their own, you learn a lot from that too. So there's just it's been one of the more leveling things. I mean, having kids, because they don't care. Sorry, this is the long-winded answer to the question.
This is a great answer. Please continue.
Well, the equalizer, because you have these weekends. Maybe you go out for 2 weeks and you come home and it's the best shows you've ever played. I mean, it's the best. You think, you know what? This is actually, I'm a badass, and I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm going to be incredibly successful. We had better ticket sales, better merch sales. This is awesome. And my kids don't care. They just want me to go play basketball in the backyard or read a book. And and then the opposite. I come home one weekend where it's like, shit, nobody came to these shows. The van broke down. This sucks. I don't ever want to do this again. Maybe I should just be a truck driver. And my kids don't care. They just want me to play basketball or read a book. And that perspective for me has been, it's easy. I mean, man, when you do this shit and you're the guy with the guitar and the microphone and you're the name on the marquee, it's real easy to focus on yourself and what you want, what you need, and how important you think you are. And they just pull that carpet right the hell out from under you every time in a really positive way, And then they also look at you. I think when you do it right, they really look at it with some admiration and go, look, this is what hard work looks like. And my kids then are, I think, more brave to try new things and things that I wouldn't have done when I was 13 or 10. And I think some of that, I hope they pick up just from being this circus act that we continue to try to pull off every day.
Well, brother, I hope as soon as this COVID madness is done that we get to see each other on that circuit somewhere. Sure. So I wish you all the best of luck with this new record. I hope to see you soon, brother. And thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us.
Great to talk to you.
This month's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Will Hoge's latest album is entitled Tiny Little Movies, out on 30 Tigers and available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.